Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to the Future History Project. This is part two, week 12, part two, and we will be discussing uh, Isaac Asimov's Robots in Time in the fourth volume, which is called Dictator by William F. Wu. It was published in 1994. The previous ones were in 1993. uh, yeah, the previous three. So, and there's the cover. It's a very poor resolution, but I guess it's not actually too bad on the screen of the cover. They all have this interesting sort of look to it. Uh, excuse me. And this one is set, or where they go back in time to December 2nd ish, the beginning of December 1941, but in Moscow. And it's the Germans are poised to attack. And the story, as we've been following, is it's set in originally 2140, and it's around the escape in time of six robots or six component robots of the Mojave Center governor, MC governor. And for this one, they are searching down the fourth component part. Now they travel in a group. There's Hunter, who is a specially designed robot that's like 6'6", and he has special powers, and he's called a hunter because he is hunting the other robots, and he's got elevated senses, smell, sight, and sound for hearing, as well as anything else that's needed. He can also change his shape and his appearance as well. And as I've been going along, I've been adding a little bit of stuff to the sort of background of the story. They travel in time. The Mojave um, Center governor, MC governor, he felt that he was being, or well, there were six gestalt, they called it, multiplex robots that have six. They can split up into six individuals that were running cities throughout the world, and they had all failed and shut themselves down due to conflicting laws of robots, the laws of the three laws of robotics. Now, this one knew that something was happening, but he prioritized the third law so he wouldn't get shut down. So he decided to escape in time. Now, he modified an existing piece of apparatus that was in an institute called the Bohung Institute, specific room FH, I think, or something like that, 112 or 12. That sort of immaterial, but it was a machine that's miniaturized to atomic level for surgery. It's going back, I think, to the novelization almost that Isaac Asimov had did with Fantastic Voyage. So they miniaturize either robots or and do surgery, but somehow the MC governor was able to modify it to travel in time. Doesn't really say or I missed that part, but I don't think it explains how he did this. But he did it, and he decides to shrink himself down as well, or each one, and each individual MC 1 to 6 sort of chose their own period in time, and they shrunk themselves down microscopically. The only problem was there was a flaw in the program for that they would expand again once they arrived in the time that they chose. And also too, that process had changed something atomically on the atomic level for them, that if they remained in that timeline and then sort of lived up until the time, or even if they didn't live, just any part of their body survived until sort of the time that they left, there'd be a huge nuclear explosion, and this was happening. So and millions were dying. So, and it's happened every time. So, and this time they knew the location, which was Moscow, from the explosion. But also the records of the machine allowed for Hunter to devise or to check to see what time periods they went to. But there's another the scientist who created these is hot on the trail of at least one of the component robots, so he can study it because he feels that the governing committee for these governors, the committee will not. Uh, there seems to be something happening in the background there, and he's afraid that they're going to destroy him and his career and everything. So he wants to find out what's happened and actually fix it first. So he becomes sort of the hero of this. And so he's also escaped back in time to search for these, and so far, every time a Hunter and his team have pipped him at the post, as it were, and got the robot. But he had found out that he can travel from the one period in the past to the next period that the MC governor went to without going back to the Bohung Institute to their president 2140. But he did that the one time in the previous book in Warrior, but he misjudged because it was cold and he didn't have any kind of protection or anything, so he had to go back to his present. And at that time there was a robot there to grab him, Ishihara, but he was able to talk him around with the first law of robotics, saying that if he doesn't get help from him, he's going to be permanently injured. So that allowed the robot to realize that there's confliction with the orders he received from the other humans, the other roboticists on Hunter's team, and from Hunter. So, but he decided to go along with him. So they went into the past again for the last novel, and then they went from 9 A.D. Northern Germany to immediately to outside Moscow, 1941. So that's the scene. It's nighttime. It's cold. It's the beginning of December. It's very cold. The German army does not have winter clothing because they were told that they would spend the winter in Moscow, so they didn't have any protection. And the Russians have sort of mostly cleared out the city of industry, and they're protecting. They're building trenches, anti-tank trenches around the city, or at least a good portion of it. And so this is a milieu that Hunter and his team sort of shows up, but they're missing one as they appear in the past, because Steve Chang, who was the sort of he helped them sort of survivalist, I guess, like to live off the land and do things like that. And he sort of was getting a bit frustrated, I think, with everything. So just as they were about to leave to go back to Moscow, he decides he was going to go. So he sort of struts off, and then they go. But they get into some trouble because with the NKVD, their current historian Judy Trout sort of accidentally starts talking to an older lady whose husband had been picked up by the NKVD, and then so she gets nabbed, and the old lady does too. So Hunter has to go and extricate her from the NKVD. And how he did that was he sort of as soon as he got near to her in the holding cell, he bluffed his way in, saying he was NKVD. So he went back to their normal time of 2140, and then he grabs Steve to come back to, saying that Jane is there all alone, and they have to go back, and they need him. So he does acquiesce and goes back with them. Meanwhile, Wayne Nystrom, who is hot on the trail of one of the MC component robots, and our Ishihara, the other robot, are are there as well, but they're dressed as sort of 9 AD, first century, beginning of the first century AD, Germanic tribes with furs and everything. So they enlist the help of the Germans to get into, they're saying that they're on the trail. So they have no identification, they have no money, they have nothing like that. And very little sort of knowledge of the time. Um, Whereas for Hunter, he researches, and he has a historical researcher, and he also makes sure the clothing is accurate, and everything too. And they get money from the time, so they can, and they take these sleep courses for the language. In this case, they all knew Russian and German of the period, so they could converse in both languages. And it's a neat thing that at the end they just go to sleep and they wake up and they have a whole language. Wow, that would be fantastic. But yeah, so they're hot on the trail. They're both hot on the trail of MC, and Nystrom and Arishihara sort of stumble on to the NKVD, and they say that they're Soviet spies, searching for a German spy of MC description, and also describe Hunter as a spy as well. So to try to throw him off. So they're in hot pursuit basically, and there's a few car chases and whatnot. And the culmination at the end of it is that Nystrom loses again, but it's in a little different way, because they are in a holding pens of German, like as prisoners, and they're going to be moved to the back of the front. And the offensive is going to start like in hours. The Germans, which they lose, but and tens of thousands of prisoners die. So they change. Their time. They go back to the original time immediately. In front of everybody, in front of prisoners, but they sort of realize that they're always concerned about changing the timeline and having this happen. But considering that probably 70-80% of those prisoners are going to be dead shortly, and there was just so much chaos that it didn't really matter. They'd already done that in a battle in Warrior in 9 AD. They disappeared during the middle of the battle. So, but again, that they didn't feel that changed anything. So as they're going on, they're realizing that the sort of chaos theory of history of one little change building and making big changes later, there's a threshold there somewhere, but they don't know what it is. That they can do little things, little interactions, and there doesn't seem to be any change at all, but they don't know where that sort of gets too big before it changes. So they're still trying to be careful, but they're taking risks at times. So they've got the fourth MC governor, and they reunite it with the other three. And Nystrom and Ishihara are sort of escaped again, but Nystrom sort of hits a German soldier just as the time that he was going to shoot Judy the historian. So he actually saved them to a certain extent, and then before they disappeared. So yeah, so it's again all these things of whether for Hunter to split up. It's again the repetition of the conundrums that they have of oh well, I can't I don't want to separate because I can't protect both, and then he's concerned about all the other problems that people are having, starvation and being beat up and being killed in war, and he can't save them all, so he's got to prioritize. And there's just the same argument over and over in every book, which, yeah, it gets a bit tiring. And the sort of you know the plot is pretty basic, because they sort of go knock on the door and say, oh, can we have shelter for the night from the cold and so forth, and they start getting to know people, or they do things, and rather than actually searching for their prey, they wind up doing a bunch of other stuff that gets them in trouble usually. But as I say, there's little things that, because now you find out that, and this is the one thing that was sort of a bit of a conundrum to me, because like in the Warrior, as I was saying about the communications, like Hunter has internal sort of radio and video that he can see, so he doesn't have to speak out loud, or he can see video on if there is video internally. But the others have this sort of like a little PAL, like a Star Trek badge that they click and they can talk to him. But obviously there's sound coming out of that, and they have to speak out of their mouths so people would see for this. But in the Warrior one, so we got Ishihara and Nystrom having a radio communication as well, but on a different frequency. So Ishihara was able to scan all the frequencies and found out which one Hunter and his team was using, so he was able to eavesdrop. So at this time, Hunter didn't even know that Ishihara was there, and so he didn't realize that this was happening. But by the time they got to Moscow, he knew that Ishihara was there with Nystrom. So therefore, and he's monitoring sort of the German and Russian radio channels. But he doesn't seem to click on the fact that, he's not listening to Ishihara's, but Ishihara is listening to theirs. It's just, like many little gaps in sort of plot and logic, and the gaps are almost big enough to drive a car through or a truck through, So it gets a little, excuse me, tiring at times, but again, I felt that I've been a little hard on these, and they're weak. They are weak, but I'm trying to put them in perspective of what they are. They're juvenile. They're made for young people, and I guess there's repetition that's going to happen with this. It's a long time since I've read something like the Hardy Boys, and that's what I would sort of compare it to. And I don't know if there's a lot of repetition in that, but they're not a continuation of a story. So he's William F. Wu is just repeating everything. Like it seems like a third or half of the story is sort of repetition of what they've done before. It's as if you've picked up this book as separate, and I guess that works in that way, because then you're not beholden or have to read the other ones to find out what's happened. But you'd think that there'd be some give or take, that you don't need to rehash the exact same thing, just with different pile. As the saying goes, same shit, different pile. It's the same thing, the same conundrums of the 3 laws of robotics. And it's getting to a point, because I'm now almost finished, like I'm just finishing up the 6th volume. But we'll get to that as well. That there's only so much variation that you can do with this, and I don't know if that's what the purpose was for this. That it meant to be individual, like each one, so you could just read the one, and that's all you really need to do. I don't know, because it would be interesting to know many things, how this came about. Like, this was the first commissioned items for the from the Isaac Asimov estate, and it was just shortly after, a year or so after he had died. So this was the first commissioned ones. And how did that come about? Like, did William F. Wu have free hand to do everything? Was there any vetting of this from the estate, or it's just, here's your remit. We just want 6 robot stories or whatever, or did he put in a prospectus of saying this is what I propose and they okayed it? These are kind of things that I and others were wondering this with the Susan Calvin trilogy as well. So these are questions that I don't have answers to, but it would be nice to have answers because they're curious to find out how this came about. Anyway, I will end it there, and we will be back tomorrow with what's it called now? It's this was Dictator, Emperor. I think it's Emperor. It's during Marco Polo's time in Kublai Khan. So that's an interesting one. Take care, Puck 2.